Hello, and welcome to this first introductory session for the module Birth, Marriage, Death, and the Media. I'm going to record this in two parts, and in this part, I'm going to talk about why I'm passionate about this module and try and give you a flavour about what's involved. In the other part, I'll talk about the nuts and bolts of the module, the dates and the assessments. It's up to you which order you do it in, but I'm certainly starting by recording this introduction to give you a flavour of the module. So my name is Professor Jenny Kitzinger, and I'm going to be your course leader and your tutorial leader and your marker and your assessor and everything during this module. This module is very much kind of my baby, very driven by some of my own research passions. So let us start a little bit by talking about who I am and then moving on to the nuts and bolts. So who am I? I'm Director of Research, Impact and Engagement in the School of Journalism, Media and Culture. I've been here for about 17 years now, an awfully long time. I used to work at Cambridge University in the Department of Social and Political Sciences. After that, I actually moved to become part of the Glasgow Media Group up in Scotland. And then I worked briefly in a London university before coming here. As well as my role as Director of Research, I am co-director of a research centre called the Coma and Disorders of Consciousness Research Centre. And I'll draw on some of that work in this session because, of course, coma is one of those interesting and tragic forms of existence which many people think is kind of between life and death. So it raises many of the issues we'll be discussing in this module. I've worked across a whole range of fields. When the AIDS crisis first hit the UK, I was involved in that, and I wrote a book on the media communication around AIDS. I've written a book on sexual violence, another on human genetics research, and another one on research methods. I'm also kind of known as a bit of a death activist. I've run festivals encouraging people to talk about end-of-life wishes, and I've been a researcher and an advocate around end-of-life decisions. So if you hadn't already tuned into this, be aware that this module is intellectually stimulating and challenging. It can also be emotionally challenging, and it deals with some sensitive issues and may raise some strong personal feelings and strong differences of opinion. So in approaching this module, think about care. That's about self-care and also care of each other. And please think about courtesy and respect for diversity. So what is the rationale for this module? Why look at something called birth, marriage, and death in the media? Well, the first rationale is that birth, marriage, and death are common experiences. Indeed, two of them are compulsory. We are all born. Some of us will give birth. Many of us will marry, and we will all die. So it's common, it's shared to us, and interestingly, it's common across time and place. That means the same sort of thing is happening regardless of the culture you come from or the different legal system you work in. But at the same time, of course, these are all socially constructed. How we understand, define, experience these things is very influenced by culture. The second rationale is that these issues are not just socially constructed, but can also be shaped by social choices and technological affordances. I don't know if you've come across the term affordances before, but this is the idea that technology doesn't determine an outcome. So we don't want to be technologically deterministic, but that technologies allow for certain outcomes. They have affordances. So a prime example of a technological affordance are the liminal states, such as living or existing in a brain dead state or in a coma or in a vegetative state. And those are all three different things. But these states, many of which are seen by people as neither dead nor alive, are created by technology. They're very new phenomena. It wasn't possible to be sustained in a warm body in these states until the last few decades with the developments of modern technology. So the concept of brain death, for example, is a modern creation or invention. And interestingly, you can be dead in one jurisdiction, but alive in another. So you have the situation in the States, for example, where a person who is defined as dead, brain dead, in one state may be moved to another state in order to be redefined legally as alive. And that makes a huge difference to their status, of course, and whether or not you can give life-sustaining treatments. So these creations are what's called iatrogenic, and that may be another word that's new to you, but an iatrogenic creation, I mean, it's kind of created by modern medicine. It's a side effect, possibly an unwanted side effect. And so we have these iatrogenic creations at the margins of life and death. And in some ways, ethics and social policy is playing catch up. The third rationale, and I hope you've already begun to think about this, is that birth, marriage, death, and those liminal states in between can be very controversial, very contested. They can be the focus of campaigns to create or change mainstream practices or cultural assumptions. So the obvious example there, for example, is the campaign for equal marriage. By that I mean gay marriage, for example. The campaign to marry someone you love, even if they're of the same sex as you are. And so looking at birth, marriage, death, and liminal states between raise fascinating ethical, moral, and political debates, and a way in which we can understand how social movements operate. And they're an ideal cross-section across which to explore questions about media, cultural representation, and the production, maintenance, and transformation of meaning. And I'm hoping that maps on to some of the thinking you've already thought about in relation to the different elements of the media you can study. So some of you will have been listening to Kerry Moore's lecture on research methods that was launched yesterday, where she was talking about you can look at how media messages are produced, who are their sources, what are the institutions and organizations that support the creation of certain kinds of stories, what about press releases, how do journalists operate? That's all a kind of production study. Or you can look at content, what are the discourses within the media, what are the images, what language is used, what are the narratives? Or you can look at audience reception, how do people make sense of meaning? And you can, of course, look at media and birth, marriage, and death through any of those lenses. And we'll come back to that when we start to talk about different types of research. And I hope some of you may also think about this for your dissertations even. So I've talked in a fairly abstract way here about some of the key principles, the key issues that make birth, marriage, death, and liminal states fascinating. But it may also help to think through with some examples. So I'd like you to have a paper and pen handy now, or if you prefer to use an online notebook, because I'm going to ask some questions and I'd like you to just note down some answers. I'll give a little pause where you can think what the answers might be. So, marriage is the first thing I'm going to talk about. And here's a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Richard and Mildred Loving. And look at that picture. I don't know if it'll set off any memories for any of you, or whether there are any clues in the picture that might make you think of the answer to the questions on the right. What happened to this couple? When? Where? So they're a very famous couple you may or may not have heard of. I love their surname, it's very easy to remember. What happened to this couple? What do you think might have happened? When and where? I'll give you a clue. It was in one of these countries. Was it England, Sweden, South Africa, or America? I'll give you a moment to choose one of those: England, Sweden, South Africa, or America. Okay, so they're famous for a legal case that happened in 1967 called Loving versus Virginia. By Virginia, we don't mean someone called Virginia, we mean the state of Virginia. They were married in Washington. They went to Washington to get married to avoid Virginia's Racial Integrity Act. So that rather appallingly named act, racial integrity, made their marriage illegal. And when they returned, they were arrested and they were sentenced to imprisonment unless they left the state for 25 years. So a very brave couple, given the punishment they could face for marrying each other, for loving each other, and to choosing to defy the racist laws of the time. And there's a romantic drama about them that was made in 1996 called Mr. and Mrs. Loving, if you do want to watch that. There are much better accounts, more accurate accounts of the politics, and there are various ways you can look at their marriage. But if you're into romance, you might want to watch that.